Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Clarisse Fortuné, and here are the stories making headlines across the continent. Senegal is on the home stretch of Sunday's parliamentary elections, a decisive moment for the ruling party PASTEF in its quest for majority in the National Assembly. Several hundreds of people hiding underground for days in an illegal South African mine with food and water cut off in an effort to smoke them out, says the government. Money, 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 economists say developing countries need at least $1 trillion per year by the end of the decade to cope with climate change. Meanwhile, Africa continues to bear the brunt, and we'll talk about the current realities of climate-forced migration on the continent. Political parties are now entering the home stretch of campaigning in Senegal. As the electorate heads to the polls this Sunday, it's a decisive moment for the ruling party in its quest for a majority in the National Assembly, particularly as the opposition moves to block their efforts. Our correspondent Catherine Kelly in Dakar has more.
Adoring fans welcome Sonko to the capital as Senegal's Prime Minister returns to Dakar after nearly 2 weeks on the campaign trail around the country. The head of the ruling PASTEF party met some of his supporters who are confident of his victory in the upcoming legislative elections.
It will be an absolute majority, that's for sure. Just look at the crowd. We're here, nobody paid us, we are sacrificing ourselves for the country.
Once we have obtained a majority, we'd like to repeal the amnesty law for crimes committed under Macky Sall and to bring to justice those who embezzled public funds.
But to win this majority in parliament, PASTEF will have to beat multiple coalitions. The Taku Wallu Senegal Alliance, Jamak Jarin, run by former Prime Minister Amadou Ba, and Dakar Mayor's Bartholomew Diaz's Sam Sakadou coalition. They have now all informally joined forces to block the ruling party.
The men and women who make up this coalition are Senegalese people steeped in values and committed to justice. They are Democrats and peace-loving people.
The electoral campaign, which ends this Friday, has been marked by several episodes of violence. Some experts argue that these incidents have diverted attention from more critical policy issues.
We could have talked about the economy, health, education, migration, and especially youth migration, which is an important issue in Senegal. So yes, I think we could have had a more in-depth debate.
This Sunday, over 7 million Senegalese will go to the polls to elect 165 members of parliament, with 41 political parties vying for seats.
The outbreak of the deadly Marburg virus is officially over in Rwanda. Health Minister Sabine Nsanzimana said no new cases were declared for nearly 2 weeks and that all patients had been discharged. The outbreak was first announced last September and vaccinations began in October. Marburg has a fatality rate of up to 88% and is transmitted to humans from fruit bats. It belongs to the same family of viruses as Ebola. Are France and the UAE violating arms embargo in Sudan? A new Amnesty International reports that armored vehicles made by the United Arab Emirates and equipped with French military technology are being used in a country's civil war. The rights group said that it had identified the weapons in various parts of Sudan, including the Darfur region where they were used by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces in its conflict with the Sudanese army. The European Union has imposed an arms embargo on the whole of Sudan since 1994, which prohibits the sale, supply, transfer or export of arms, including weapons and military vehicles. Hundreds of illegal gold miners are still hiding underground in a mine shaft in Stilfontein in Northwest Province. The government cut off food and water in an effort to force them out and arrest them. A decision that some criticized as inhuman. Laurent Bestecher has the story.
Lying in wait around an invisible entrance, South African police and medical workers remained huddled around a mining shaft in the town of Stilfontein, where hundreds of illegal miners were still holed up underground.
It is unsafe, it's inhumane to allow people to go down there. We have taken a decision that no police officer, no soldier, no government official will go down to an abandoned mine.
The so-called Close the Hole operation was launched in December last year as part of a wider crackdown on illegal mining. Operations intensified last month, including in Stilfontein, where police closed off entrances used to bring in supplies, effectively laying siege to hundreds of miners who are refusing to come out for fear of being arrested. Over 1,000 people have resurfaced in the past month. Many were reportedly weak and sickly and were given medical treatment before being taken into custody. In recent days, crowds have been flocking to the site and have been pleading with authorities to help get their loved ones out safely.
Those people must come out because we have brothers there, we have sons there. The father of our kids are there. What is going to happen to them? They are going to die if they don't get medication, water to sustain them.
Faced with growing pressure and accusations of inhumane treatment, the South African government has so far refused to back down. On Wednesday, a cabinet minister ruled out sending supplies to the miners and said security forces were going to smoke them out.
In Nigeria's Borno state, unrelenting price increases and brutal insurgency already made it hard to get by. And now a series of devastating floods, which affected around 9 million people, have further added to the misery, leading the UN to warn of an impending food insecurity crisis.
When she arrived in Maiduguri, after years of fleeing jihadist violence, Indo Usman thought she had finally found a home. But after devastating floods washed away the farm she was working on, the young woman found herself on the run again. She now lives in a makeshift displacement camp in Borno State and relies on handouts to feed her family.
I've cried so much my eyes hurt. I don't think I can ever cry again. All we have is the food that they give us.
Like Usman, millions of Nigerians were forced to flee their homes after a dam collapsed in September, flooding the Borno state capital and its surrounding farmland. Many ended up in already overcrowded refugee camps with no resources or means to earn a living. The UN now warns of an impending humanitarian crisis and says there isn't enough food to go around.
We have witnessed a situation where we have immense devastation due to the floods, and this has really pushed people to the brink of their food insecurity. We are really prioritizing the hungriest of the hungry.
A devastating economic crisis and a rampant jihadist insurgency have already plunged some 25 million Nigerians in a situation of acute food insecurity, a number that's expected to rise to 33 million by June next year.
Nigeria, like many other countries on the continent, being particularly vulnerable to sudden onset events such as floods, forcing the displacement of millions of people. And as a result, people move internally, intra-regionally, continentally, and as COP29 is still underway. Let's bring in Yvonne Dege. She's from IOM, the International Organization for Migration, and to discuss how climate change comes into the equation. Welcome. Thank you very much, Yvonne Dege, for coming and help us to understand. So what do we know about the extent of climate change induced migration and displacement in Africa?
Well, Clarice, thank you very much for this opportunity. The scale of climate change-related migration and displacement on the continent of Africa is very significant and huge in some areas of the continent. Over the last few years, we have seen intense, very severe droughts, particularly in the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Djibouti, which has experienced the worst drought in more than 40 years. There has been severe flooding in some parts of the continent. We've witnessed rising sea levels, There have been extreme temperatures in West Africa, in particular, in countries like Mali, Niger, Benin, Cameroon, and of course, North Africa has been impacted. Now, the effect of all of this is wide-scale, large-scale displacement. Last year, we know that over 24 million people globally were displaced due to climate impact. We know that on the continent of Africa, the number of people displaced, forced from their homes, their livelihoods, destroyed, decimated in some areas, reached almost 6 million. So the connection between climate change and displacement and migration is extremely important. And at COP29, IOM, the International Organization for Migration, is going with a very clear and simple message, which is that we can no longer talk about climate change without talking about migration and human mobility and the impact that climate change is having on communities who are very, very vulnerable, some of the most vulnerable in the world, as we see on the continent of Africa.
And you're talking about the impact, I'm guessing, also having an impact on the economy.
Well, that's right, because as a consequence of some of these disasters, these climate-related, environment-related disasters that we see, it's causing massive displacement internally, meaning people moving from one part of a country to another, but also across borders. Many leave because of fear, concern for their own safety, but also livelihoods are destroyed. Remember that across Africa, most people, most economies across the continent rely on agriculture. And when agriculture is impacted by these climate disasters, people are forced to flee in search of jobs and opportunities. Some do so regularly and some do irregularly, taking great risks as they try to find those alternative livelihoods. Yes, this is also having an impact, obviously, on the economies of these countries, as, of course, they're unable to meet the needs of people who are living across some of these countries that I've mentioned.
And you mentioned COP29, which is underway in Baku in Azerbaijan. The focus we've been talking is about money and how much rich countries should provide. But what is IOM actually expecting to get out of this COP29?
Well, that's right. IOM, the International Organization for Migration, and the UN's Migration Agency has a presence at COP29 in Baku. And the message that we are sending to delegates and participants there is that we can no longer talk about climate change without talking about the impact on migration and human mobility. Climate finance is essential to help countries across Africa, who are amongst the worst impacted, adapt to the impact of climate change. Adaptation plans are being put in place by multiple countries across the continent, but those adaptation plans to mitigate the impact of climate change, to build resilience amongst those communities who are most vulnerable, to find alternative solutions for those vulnerable communities who want to stay at home, and solutions for those who wish to relocate, all needs to be financed. So the message is about climate finance. It's about ensuring that migration, displacement, and human mobility are part and parcel and very much at the center of the discussions going on at COP29. At COP29, IOM has a pavilion where participants and delegates can actually hear from climate impacted migrants and displaced persons themselves and how climate change has been affecting and turning lives upside down across the continent, and some of the solutions that are needed in order to respond, to enable some of these countries to adapt to the climate change situation and to build resilience. Migration, we are saying, is a solution. If migration, human mobility, and displacement are brought into the conversation about climate change, then it will, of course, we'll be able to respond to those who have been impacted, those who have been displaced, like I said, nearly 6 million across the continent of Africa, and of course, the other host communities who host many of these displaced communities can also be responded to.
And quickly, you were talking about alternative solutions. Can you give us an example of what solution could be appropriate?
Well, that's right. So many of the countries that have been impacted by some of the severe weather events that I've explained, such as drought and severe flooding, are putting together national adaptation plans that basically engage new technologies to respond to some of the impacts of climate change, particularly in the agricultural sector, but also other sectors. So technology definitely plays a big role. Also, partnering with the private sector and private sector investment to find and seek alternative solutions to mitigate and respond to the impact of these disasters. And as I said earlier, to also provide those all-important solutions for those who are being internally displaced in their own countries, many fleeing to urban areas, meaning that urban areas are being overcrowded. Solutions are needed there, but those who are also deciding that they want to move, that they want to leave, and ways of looking at safe pathways and regular pathways to give people alternatives where they can no longer stay at home.
Thank you very much. Ivan Lege, thank you very much for your analysis. And this concludes our edition. On behalf of the Eye on Africa team, thank you for watching.